Okay.
Welcome everyone to today's Striving webinar on delivering great marketing without a budget. I'm Emily, the head of marketing at the Transformation Group and one of the founding members of Striving, a community of professionals focused on peer-to-peer development. So whether you're working for a non-for-profit, a small business or a startup, marketing can feel really challenging when you're faced with limited resources. But the good news is that some of the most effective marketing strategies don't require big budgets, just creativity, resourcefulness, and a deep understanding of your audience. So today we'll be exploring various topics, including how you can harness the power of storytelling, community engagement, digital platforms and partnerships to make a meaningful impact, even with zero or minimal spend. So before I hand over to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, I'd love to hear from everyone online today what area of marketing you're representing. So I imagine there's a lot of variety from B2B, events, B2C, recruitment, and everything in between. So please share your answers in the chat. Our expert panelists have first-hand experience in driving successful marketing initiatives with limited resources, and they're here to share their insights and practical tips that you can apply immediately. So with that, Ali, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Emily. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ali, Alexandra King. I'm one of the two co-founders of a business in Sydney called Ask Marketing, ASK Marketing. The business is about 7 years old and predominantly now works with B2B and services businesses to help them to essentially develop thought leadership, generate demand and grow. And we do those things through kind of two key pieces or service offerings. Number one is the development of strategies, and secondary is delivering fractional CMO services to businesses. And by fractional, and I'm sure Kayla will talk about this as well, but fractional means essentially offering a part-time service offering into a business. And in my case, that's in a CMO role, so a head of marketing or chief marketing officer role in a fractional capacity, which means, it could be half a day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, depending on the business. My background prior to having this company for 7 years was actually consumer, so the B2C side. And probably my favorite role or thing that I did in the B2C world was when I landed a role as head of marketing for Reebok, which then became run into a subsidiary of the Adidas Group, and doing that huge migration program, I should say, from Reebok into Adidas. And now I'm completely B2B. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation, which will tackle both.
And then, hi, I'm Kayla. So my whole career has been in B2B SaaS, mostly in startups and more towards the early stage. And pretty much for my entire career, I've either been the only marketer in the team, or I've been the first marketer who's been there to set up and get everything started. So I'm very familiar with having no money and huge targets. And now I pretty much do the same thing in a fractional capacity as well. So my specialties are in product marketing and growth marketing, and most of my clients are, early stage startups that don't have marketing teams, or everyone's outsourced like myself. So yeah, this topic's very me.
Thank you both. You've had both diverse and really interesting backgrounds, so thank you for sharing. We're really in for an insightful discussion today. And I can see that there's been a couple of people in the chat just mentioning there. So I do encourage you to use the chat throughout the whole session. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick things off. You will notice that Renee has started posting a couple of things in the chat. Thank you, Renee. She's moderating today. So you'll see her share some resources throughout and answer any questions that you might have. So again, we do have the Q&A at the end of the session. Please, I encourage you to add those questions into the chat. If there is something that maybe it is a little bit more sensitive that you want to ask of our panelists, but you don't quite feel comfortable, feel free to DM it to me, and I'll share it with them after the session so that we can get those answers for you as well. So that's definitely enough for me. I'm really excited to get started. And let's start with you, Ali. Like you have mentioned already a little bit about your experience experience in both B2C and B2B. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the similarities and the differences are between B2B and B2C if we're framing this for our attendees this morning?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'll start by not assuming that everybody knows what those acronyms are, because there are a lot in marketing. So B2C stands for business to consumer, and B2B stands for business to business. So if you're an emerging marketer, the easiest way to think about that is B2C is a business that sells to an end user. It could be a product, it could be Apple selling to a consumer to use an iPhone, and the B2B world would be, Apple also has a B2B. In fact, that's a good example. B2C is where Apple sells to me and I use the iPhone. B2B is business to business, which is where Apple would sell to JB Hi-Fi, who will then on-sell that product. That's business to business. So I guess the key similarity in both of those kind of marketing methodologies is that you're always selling to a human. And that's something, I guess, to really always remember. And I, used to always kind of call it like H to H, if we really did have another acronym, which is that human to human element. And I think that's really important to remember in both of those kind of facets of marketing, whether it be B2B or B2C. From a differences perspective, there's a lot. In the B2C world, I guess, starting with the fact that as a marketer, you have more control over the transaction. So whether that be an e-commerce business, for example, selling an iPhone, a marketer is able to very clearly and distinctly really drive a user all the way from unawareness to awareness, all the way through to transacting online and really owning that entire funnel. Versus in the B2B space, of course, there is slightly less control or a more shared control of the outcome, because in the B2B world, there are longer timelines, potentially more decision makers at the table, and of course the integration that's needed to happen with sales or business development. So that's probably the first thing, is the control of the outcome, or the control toward the overarching contract being signed or the revenue coming into the business, however that's happening. Another kind of similarity and difference, I should say, is that in the B2C world, you have less time to capture an audience. So we all know the consumer world is so saturated. The amount of information that we're distilling on a second by second basis now is so overwhelming in everything that we do. So in the consumer world, and I'm sure Kayla will speak to this, in a startup particularly, you have a lot less time to cut through the noise. Versus and the difference would be in the B2B world, you have a lot longer. And that can often be because, another difference, this is not always the case, but if I really try and draw a bit of a quick comparison, the B2C world is often a lesser transaction value, as opposed to the B2B world, where you're selling potentially a service that is going to be quite a high transaction value. So with that comes more time. So in the B2B world, more people at the table, more decision makers, a longer sales process, a proper integration with sales, and potentially a higher transaction value. And I guess also with B2B, there can also be quite a large amount of influence offline. So with coffees, lunches, a lot more face-to-face might be needed, a much more blended approach to marketing. And also the number of touch points to influence the transaction. I think it's sitting in the B2B world now about 12 to 13 touch points before a decision maker signs a contract and money is actually attained. So yeah, that kind of be the top 4 or 5. I mean, I could go on for hours, but I think they're kind of the key things anyway.
I think one thing I would add is just the speed is definitely a big factor, but the other one is scale. So, when you read about like marketing advice and stuff like that, it's always like A/B test, do experiments, all that kind of stuff. But that only works when you have a scale where you've got enough people going through your pipeline to actually give you statistically significant results. Like, it's not uncommon for a B2B business to be like, this month we need 5 leads, whereas an e-commerce might be like, we need 1 million. So what you can do with 5 versus what you can do with 1 million is just completely different.
Totally. It's a really good point.
Yeah, they're great points. And that is, a really good segue, Kayla, into my next question for you. So what are some DIY B2B marketing tactics that you found to be surprisingly effective?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is email nurtures, because the way that usually if I go into something that's a blank slate and I've got to start from scratch, what I want to do is set up automated tasks that can run in the background, and then I can continue to build on them, but I don't want to go back to them and be redoing them all the time. So when you do have these really long sales cycles and you need to be constantly in touch with your leads, having an automated email journey that's like really high quality, maybe you spend a couple of weeks, a month setting it up, but then it can run on its own for 6 months before you need to maybe, change some of it or something like that. So thinking in terms of programs, like building a program, letting it run, building another program, and then, slowly over time, your like tower gets taller, or however you want to imagine it. That would really be my advice for DIY.
I think that really aligns with what Ali was saying as well in terms of the multiple touch points, like the longer buying cycles. That it's a really great way to be able to connect with your customers, particularly from that digital touch point. Ali, the next question. In B2B marketing, how can marketing still be a revenue generating business function despite having lower budgets? So I'm sure a lot of people on the call, and to be honest, like myself included, the budgets are limited. So how can you still be driving those results for the business? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think I would start by saying that in the B2B world, and that's obviously a really specific question to the B2B world, but I really think that if you, as a marketer, when you come into organization, really understand what those touch points are, from unawareness about the business and the service or the product that it's offering, all the way through to the sale, and understanding how marketing, from a low-hanging fruit perspective, insert itself into different stages or different touch points, all the way from unawareness through to someone signing a contract with that business, and understanding how marketing can provide value at that point of the sales cycle to add value and give that purchaser, that end client or consumer, the decision maker, the information and the content that they need to make the decision faster. And I think that's really important. I think we so often build strategies and have everything happening all the way from, brand awareness through to much more, conversion-based marketing. But I think as a first point, having that conversation with somebody in the sales or business development team to understand what content or collateral or technology could be needed or provided or layered on by marketing to essentially support the sale happening, whether that's, additional case studies, whether that's using a new MarTech tool, whether that be, a pre-qualification checklist, that marketing can provide through a technology or platform to ensure that the sales meetings are more meaningful and to make sure that they're having conversations with people who are not going to be time wasters, all the way through to, just to metrics. And I think that's a really good point. And to answer the question and come back to that question, I think marketing's metrics being really aligned to revenue is the most important thing. And the kind of 3 key metrics that I would call out is that marketing should be accountable and attributable to is, number 1, the number of leads, qualified leads coming into the business. Number 2, the number of leads that result in a sales meeting. And 3, the total number of leads that result in a conversion. And I think if you're attributing marketing to those 3 metrics at a board level or a senior leadership team level, marketing will always be able to be a revenue generating function. I think, vanity metrics and reporting on the, intricate details of like how lead nurture, how email nurture, and how, different channels and socials, etc., like LinkedIn as a platform is working is great. There'll always be a place for it. But if you come back at a leadership level to those 3 metrics, it will ensure that the influence that marketing is having is able to be attributed toward closed sales. And so how you do that is complicated, and some of it can be automated, but a lot of it will always need to be, discovered by, at the end of each month, sitting down with sales reps and understanding, how marketing was influenced how marketing was able to influence, I should say, that sales process, or by speaking to the client or the customer. So
I'd say if your leadership is pushing back and saying like, oh, we don't think marketing is revenue aligned or something like that, then one way to course correct is have a list of things that you're not going to do and say like, well, I've had a request for this piece of work, but I don't see how that is aligned to revenue. So sorry, I'm not going to do it. Or can we find a way to make this piece of work aligned to revenue? And sometimes it is a bit more vague. You could say we're going to do a case study and we don't think it'll result in leads, but maybe it'll shorten the sales cycle and it will get us to revenue faster. And like that is a metric that you can track. So, sometimes it's not super clear, but you can push to either make it clear or say like, we weren't able to make it clear when we can't prioritize this piece of work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Each of you called out actually two things there that kind of stuck with me in terms of themes. Stakeholder engagement, so working with stakeholders in your business to really align where those goals are, but then also measure the metrics that matter. Like, what are the metrics that you really want to use, and use data to kind of help tell your story. And yeah, Ali, you really spoke there around like really focusing on one area of potentially the pipeline as well. Like, I think that that's a really clever strategy, particularly for someone with a lower budget. I mean, you can't boil the ocean, you can't do everything. So really picking where those key priorities are. Yeah, great answers. Thank you. Kayla, how can marketing teams advocate for resources depending on the stage of business and size?
Yeah, it's super close to what we were just talking about with proving that you're aligned to revenue. And if you can position your budget in terms of ROI or a goal in terms of revenue and say, if we spend this much money in marketing, we expect to make this much money in sales. And obviously the sales number should be bigger than the spend, and really use like a clear outline of how that money is going to be used. That can be really successful in terms of turning leadership around, especially if you can use past numbers to prove that these aren't just, theoretical figures you've pulled out of thin air, but that you really can make it work. And then the other thing is that, a resource could be a person. So for me, there's been a lot of times where I've had to do too many things and juggle too many plates. And what has worked in terms of getting more resources is sitting my boss down and saying, what do you want me to work on? Like, what do you want me as an individual in this company to be spending my time on? What is the highest priority and best return on my time that you would be really happy with? And then once you have that list, be like, okay, great, I can do that. But that means I can't do all of these things. I don't have time for these things anymore if I'm prioritizing this thing that you've agreed you really want me to be doing. So let's look into a fractional marketer, an agency, a freelancer, someone that we can scale up and down as we need. So it's not a permanent investment. We're not locked in for 12 months or anything like that, but we can get everything on this to-do list done while sticking to the priorities that you've outlined for me.
For sure. I think something that's been quite effective in helping to build a bit of a business case beyond, I guess, the story and the metrics is really being able to lean on people within the business. And again, it comes back to something that you've both mentioned in terms of that stakeholder engagement. So if I have, an idea, I'm like, okay, this can I think I can bring this to life if XYZ happens. I'll then walk around the office with it and say, hey, what do you think about this? Like, whether it is a sales consultant or a director, someone who maybe isn't necessarily in my clear hierarchy in terms of reporting line. But I think that there is a lot of value in sharing your ideas within an organization and building advocates around your ideas and business cases. So when you do get to your boss or whoever, that leadership presence is, it's really already kind of been validated by the business. And you can say, hey, I've spoken to XYZ. They've really validated this and I've got all the metrics to back it up. We've come up with a plan. So you're really going to the business with a potential solution rather than kind of like creating these problems. But I'm not necessarily saying that anyone has mentioned that at all. But yeah, I do think it's around stakeholders for sure. Like that's a really big part of the decision-making process and getting buy-in for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. Awesome. So the next question here, what are some tips for growing engagement and reach organically, especially when starting from a small following? So Ali, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
Okay, that is a great question. I'm going to tackle this in 3 key ways. And that would be how you can do it using AI, how you can do it digitally, and how you can do it face-to-face. So I would say there's 3 kind of key things, and I'll go in the reverse order. So number 1 is actually just getting out there. Sounds silly, but I think more so than ever before, the face-to-face world is absolutely back. And I'm talking specifically to B2B, particularly at the moment, getting in front of decision makers. I think, hiding behind a screen to do sales and marketing now is not going to work. Getting out there and speaking to customers and speaking to potential clients is so important. So going to events, being part of membership groups, being at the right conferences, going to events, I think it's really, really important, and kind of finding your group of people that you align with who could be, if you're a fractional marketer, getting in front of, fractional CPOs, like someone like Kayla, and finding and leaning on that kind of circle to build your people, I think is really important, because obviously that is more powerful than ever at the moment. Number 2 would be how to do it digitally. By that physically, I mean, in a high quality, low volume way, growing your connections on LinkedIn in a really purposeful way. And that's not by just, adding people en masse. And then the 3rd key way using AI would be to actually leverage tools like Dripify that allow you to build your connection requests at scale, but in a really personalized way. And obviously, I would never suggest doing this until you're 100% clear on who who are the decision makers that you're trying to target on LinkedIn. But once you are clear on who they are, where they're based, and what their job roles are, and what types of businesses and what business sizes they're in, you can be really, really clear about some parameters on Dripify. And plugging that into your LinkedIn to support growth, of course, again, in a low, high quality, low volume way, before the conversation then goes back to yourself, the real person. But that is a really smart way, so that when you do have busy weeks, you can really capitalize on being able to grow your following. I think you're allowed 100 requests per week on LinkedIn. So maybe you automate, let's say 60 to 80% of those, and then you save, the other percent to you going to events and actually meeting people, and then you doing it yourself on LinkedIn. So I think really having a blended approach to that would, like across those kind of 3 key ways, would be my tip. Yeah,
I'll add you had some great tech recommendations. I have more of a mindset recommendation, which is that when you don't have an audience, a lot of people are really scared to try things, because it's I'm gonna everyone's gonna see me, it's gonna be embarrassing. But actually, you don't have an audience, so no one's gonna see you, and it's not gonna be embarrassing. And you'll always cringe when you look back on your own stuff. So just get it out of the way and just start. It'll get better with time.
So true.
Yeah. And then in terms of picking a tech platform to send stuff out, make sure that you're always trying to lead people back to a channel that you own. So whether that's building a newsletter list or just making sure that they get on your website so that you can capture, through a pixel for retargeting. Even if you don't have a budget to retarget, you still want to make sure you're capturing that audience, because later you might have a budget where you can do retargeting. But yeah, try not to rely on if you reach out on LinkedIn, don't let it stay forever on LinkedIn. Like, try and get them into a channel that you have more control over.
Love that.
Yeah, there's some great, really tangible advice there. So thank you both. Kayla, how do you create high quality content when you have limited resources for production?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you either spend money or you spend time. So pick your poison and commit to it. If you are going to outsource your content creation, I would really recommend like having a thorough brief, like extremely well thought out, like extremely detailed. The more information you can give to the person that you're outsourcing this to, the more likely you are for that first draft to come back and be, way more in line with what you were hoping for. I think if you are working with a brand that doesn't have a lot of branding, like assets and things and colors and whatever, like if it's not super well developed, you might want to look for someone who has experience working with really limited scope, because I've definitely had experiences where I've gone to really high quality production and they've just come back with like, I need this giant list of things, and it's like, oh, none of that exists. Really sorry. And I'm not a designer, so I can't magically make it appear, and I don't have budget to extend your scope for you to create that. So that's definitely, if you're going to spend money, really invest your time in the brief. And then if you don't have budget for production and you are going to be doing it yourself, I think lean into that DIY vibe and really own it. Like, fake it till you make it in terms of confidence in your content. And if you are, writing a blog or something, like really invest your time in that. If you're going to make a video, really invest, like you have to be invested in it for it to be good quality.
I'll just add to that, I think to Kayla's point and how you can do that if you are an internal marketer inside of, a B2B organization, like really rely on the internal subject matter experts, whether they are in the tech team, whether they one of the founders, somebody in the product team. These are all internal subject matter experts that you can rely on. And I think that like really leans into what we were talking about before when we opened this conversation around it being human to human. Like, people really want to hear about a human. If you can talk to, Kayla, who's the head of product inside this amazing, B2B SaaS platform, Kayla's going to have some amazing insights. It can be, if you're sitting there doing a role of copywriting internally, for example, to build a long form piece of written content, the more you can kind of leverage those internal subject matter experts, the better. Same with video content. I think that's really powerful. It also means there's less reliance on you being the subject matter expert, because quite often when you're in a marketing role in a bigger business, you could be the best marketer in the world, but you're not a subject matter expert yet in that particular service, product, or sector. So I think the more you can rely on those subject matter experts and their roles, regardless of where they sit in the business, that is specific in the subject matter that's going to resonate with the audience of that piece of content. Not only does it make your job easier, but it makes it more pointed to who's going to be reading it or listening to it, or watching it if it's a video. So, don't feel pressure that you have to be the subject matter expert is, I think, the point that I'm making. Because quite often for quite some time as a marketer, or if you've just started in an organization or you're not from that particular industry or sector and you're bringing your marketing skill sets into that sector, of course you have to rely on the subject matter experts, and it's okay to do that.
Yeah, you just reminded me that usually when I'm working, I'll have a list of all the resources that I have available. So when you're like doing everything, right, you know all these things that exist, but you forget about them just because you've got so much in your head. So if you actually list down, like, here's all the possible channels we have, here's all the possible subject matter experts we have, here's all the people who have like a photography hobby and they could lend us a camera, like list out everything you have access to. And when you're really stuck, it's super helpful to go back to that list and be like, oh yeah, I can call on this person to help, or I haven't tapped into this resource for a while, maybe they've got some spare time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think B2B or B2C, I think there is definitely something to be said that, as Ali, you pointed out at the beginning, H to H, human to human, people want to buy from people. So having the thought leadership or thought leadership from the subject matter experts can really add that level of gravity to your content. The only other thing that I would add here that I think both of you have alluded to is just creating, I guess, content that can be repurposed. So I think it's kind of marketing 101, right, in terms of content production. But even for today, so we're hosting this webinar, for example, and I'm not really sure how the marketing team are going to distribute this, but if I was in the marketing team for Strivin, I would be, downloading the audio file and sharing that as a podcast. I would be, creating snippets of these webinars, and I've seen Strivin do that really well and distribute that. They're probably capturing a number of different blog opportunities from topics that they can see are resonating with their audience. So depending on, the questions that are asked at the end. So I think that there is a lot to be said as well for distribution and how you can take one piece of content and just really scale it. And really kind of maximize your distribution to kind of pull out those key messages that you really want to get across to a broader audience, because I think that will really, help in terms of the cost-conscious marketer and just really, help make your life a little easier. Awesome. We'll move on to the next question now. So Kayla, if you only had budget for one paid media channel, what would it be?
So I definitely am working with a client where I only have budget for one paid media channel. And to be honest, it's like 6 months of testing one channel at a time and then evaluating which one worked, which can be really painful in terms of like not seeing results straight away. But it's also important like to have this testing plan, to have check-in points to see how it's going, and also have the kind of determination to say, okay, this is not working, cut it off early. We don't need to continue spending money, and like let's just start the next test earlier, because that way you can just get to your one channel sooner. And once you have that channel, continually test it as well. So always be making sure that it's performing at the standard you want it to. Set a benchmark, make sure it's meeting that benchmark, and if it's not, then you unfortunately have to go back to testing other channels again.
Yeah, it would be quite hard to focus on purely just one. It's quite a lengthy process to go through that test and learn discovery as well. For the next question, Kayla, before we do jump over to Q&As, so if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, please pop them in the chat, because this one is our last question for today. So Kayla, are there any tools or platforms that you recommend for creating compelling content on a shoestring budget?
Paper and pen. I think if you build your strategy and like genuinely think through, okay, we're making this piece of content, these are the expectations for what it will achieve, here's where it fits in the funnel, is it top of funnel, is it bottom of funnel, here's where it sits in the sales cycle, we want people to be emailing it to prospects at this point, or here's where it sits in a nurture that's automated. Having all of that is going to make the content so much more valuable because it's actually getting used, and the way that it's getting used is planned before you make it, so you can make it appropriate for the channels that you've picked for it. So yeah, I use Miro. Every thought I have is on Miro. Every like diagram in my head is written out. So Miro's free. You can get just have one unlimited whiteboard that you put every single thought you ever have into. It'll take forever to load, but it works.
I think I'll just add to that. Obviously, there's kind of like two key approaches to marketing in the B2B world. There's the kind of like top-down approach, which is like top of funnel is really broad, and then you kind of narrow people down toward a conversion. But the other approach that's becoming even more and more pointed now, we also have less budgets in some particular industries, I should say, which is the bottom up. And that is really reverse engineering your marketing strategy to what I guess is called ABM, or account-based marketing. And that account-based marketing takes what Kayla is talking about one step even further, and really understanding who are your kind of whale or wish list 5 to 10 clients that if you could close would just make a huge difference and move the needle for this organization. So if you have that list, and I implore marketing to have a seat at the table for those conversations with the senior leaders of the business to understand who those whale or wish list clients are. And then based on that, understanding, to Kayla's point, what content can be created in an account-based fashion to achieve the attention and the conversion of those specific wish list clients, and really creating content that's completely customized toward them. So if it's a health tech SaaS platform, understanding who the decision makers are that are their clients, and creating content, whether it be thought leadership, top of funnel content, all the way through to case study based content that is going to resonate with that decision maker, that ultimately is all about closing that one whale wish list client. Whilst that is going to take more time, energy, and specificity, again, coming back to Kayla's point previously, it's so much more pointed toward achieving a result, as opposed to the other way of marketing, which of course still needs to be done, but the top-down approach, which is a bit more always on, a bit more broad, casting a big net to catch all the fish as opposed to one. But I think there's something to be said for really sitting down and doing that in a much more tailored fashion and using that account-based marketing approach, especially with a lesser budget.
Yeah, hopefully it'll last you longer as well, and you won't have to go back and start the work again in like 2 weeks.
Absolutely. It's all about prioritization. You only have so many resources. So where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? I think, ABM is definitely something that we haven't mentioned in this conversation, but for B2B, it is one of the most important elements of supporting pipeline. Absolutely. Yeah. Alrighty, so over to questions now from our guests, or our audience, I should say. So we have had one question above. So general question, how will AI affect marketing in B2B soon? So thanks, Joven, for that one. Our panelists, over to you. Any thoughts?
It already is. It already is. Thanks, Joven. Nice to meet you. It already is. I mean, this conversation goes well beyond marketing, of course. It was only yesterday that I was questioning a customer service person on the phone in a B2B service business, and I said, "Are you a bot? Are you a bot?" And they said no, and then I continued to ask, and then I started questioning if that particular industry was appropriate to be using robots. Anyway, that's another conversation. But I think we can't escape it. I think in a marketing, with a purely marketing lens, I think in the B2B world we have to remember the human to human touch point element will never ever go away. So AI can never replace sitting down and having an eyeball to eyeball conversation over a coffee and creating a human connection that's about life. Do I like this person? Can I help them? Can I add value to their life? Great, let's do business together. That will never go away. It can never be replaced. So I think just remembering that and having the humility and making sure that the connection is always still there regardless is never going to go away. I think how AI is going to help, it's going to certainly, and it is certainly making things like content creation and distribution, like we just spoke about, a lot more efficient, as well as how marketing and sales can work together. So if we talk about outreach, whether it's outbound sales outreach that marketing is partly attributable to, there's amazing AI platforms like Rask.ai, there are so many that are allowing outbound connection requests. I talked about Dripify, outbound sales, outbound marketing, and account-based marketing at scale in a personalized way that's absolutely making our jobs more and more efficient. And I think it absolutely serves, absolutely serves a role at the very, very top of the funnel before the conversation then gets passed in either digital or face-to-face to a human. And then from a content creation perspective, we're seeing it, can you create all of your content on ChatGPT? No, but can it absolutely help? Of course. Will we still need subject matter expertise? Yes. So if you can kind of find that, it's kind of like the human sandwich, like a human creates the brief, to Kayla's point. You inject AI to really do a lot of the grunt work, and then a human then reviews and polishes. that's super efficient. I'm sure, Kayla, you've got more to add, but they're kind of my two key things.
Yeah, I would just add that if you're a team of one, or if you have a really tiny marketing budget, it's likely that you're in a very early stage company or a small company that's probably got really big competitors. And I think you need to ask, like, what is our differentiation? And it's definitely not going to be AI content that makes your brand stand out against these huge competitors who have huge budgets, right? Like, think about what you can leverage from your brand to grow and stand out and attract customers, and make sure that you never assign that to AI, because you'll just lose everything that makes you unique. So, if you want to do thought leadership or be founder led or something like that, unfortunately, AI is not a thought leader. It's an amalgamation of everything that already exists. So if you want to be ahead, you can't be relying on AI generated content or anything like that. But to Ali's point, distribution is where you really can use it.
Yeah, as you've both pointed out there, I think it's really interesting to see how consumer behavior has shifted since pieces of technology like ChatGPT have become a consumer product. So even the way, I guess, for us as marketers, even the way that people are searching for things on Google, or what resources they have access to get information, is changing. So I think that is a challenge for us as well, that we need to kind of move with the motions in terms of how are consumers finding information. But on top of that as well, and you both pointed it out there, people are becoming more critical of the information that is presented to them. So for our business, we have seen social media and organic advocates within our company, from a personal branding perspective, and that area of marketing is actually becoming even more effective than some of our email marketing campaigns, because people can attach a person's face to it. It's not like a faceless marketing email that they're receiving in their inbox. It's actually coming from a person, and they can attribute some kind of values to that information. So I think it's really key for, like, as Kayla pointed out, that you can't just, put something into ChatGPT and expect it to stand out in a crowd. It's not. People want to hear from people. They want to hear your perspective on things. And it's really interesting to see how, I guess, our audiences are shifting, and the sentiment towards how information is accessed and content is accessed, because people are becoming increasingly more critical of the information that they're being presented with. Thank you both for your answers there. I think that's such a big topic, so you did really well to cover it in a couple of minutes. You had some really great points. Another question has come in from Amy, so we'll probably just use this as the last question and then wrap the session up. What software/organizational tips do you use to keep track of your outreach?
I would just say whatever CRM you have, like, what are you sending the emails out from? Is it HubSpot? Is it another platform? If it's LinkedIn, then try and integrate that with your CRM. There's definitely ways to do it. But yeah, you definitely should have it with your other, like, lead tracking software.
Yeah, I think ideally, it depends on what type of outreach. There's so many different outreach forms, but to Kayla's point, definitely if it's email outreach, making sure that it's being tracked in the CRM, whether it's HubSpot or otherwise. There's so many amazing ones now. But if you are going to plug in a kind of like an incremental tool to support, I personally love Dripify. I can't floor it. Dripify, you can jump on their website and have a look, but it integrates with LinkedIn, and you can do all of your tracking and reporting in there. Again, making sure that you understand really, really specifically who is the decision maker, who you want to target first, and using it to build connections at scale in a personalized way before the conversation then gets taken offline. So kind of the core metric around that would just be, number of people that you've requested who go through to accepting, and then obviously taking the conversation potentially offline and not selling them something, which is important to remember. But yeah, I would say if it's not your CRM, it's, using a tool like Dripify.
Awesome. Thanks, ladies. I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for joining us, Ali and Kayla. You're so insightful. Thank you for answering all of the questions that we've had today. And thank you for sharing all of your insights. So for anyone in the audience who wants to connect with Ali and Kayla, I encourage you to connect with them on LinkedIn. Ali's at Ask Marketing. Kayla, I believe, has added her newsletter into the chat comments, so make sure you subscribe to that one if you're interested. Also just mention, for anyone that's on the call, Strivent do have a number of marketing workshops and short courses. So Renee will be able to supply all the information to that in the chat as well if she hasn't already. So thank you again for joining us. We really hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any other questions, please reach out. Have a lovely day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Emily.